All right, folks. So thank you so much for joining us today. And hello and welcome to everyone who's just joining in. Thank you so much for joining us. We have our digital version of our Elevate Career series, the Elevate Career Hacks Online. Today, our conversation is going to center around the new landscape of the modern workplace, hybrid teams. So my name is Kate Krause. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations for the School of Engineering, and I'm thrilled to be here with you today. I'm also joined by three of my outstanding colleagues. I have Josh Prue, the Director of Alumni Engagement for the UConn Foundation, as well as Kelly Lewis, the Associate Director for the College of Liberal Arts, and Kristen Luger. The four of us collaborate on this career series, and are really thrilled that you're here with you today. We are going to be having our discussion with an outstanding panel of some of our HUSB experts. Before I go ahead and hand it over to them to take it away, I just want to mention a few housekeeping items. So first, closed captioning is now available. So should you wish to utilize this service, please feel free to visit your toolbar on Zoom and select the closed captioning option. You should activate subtitles, and that should be there available for you. Should you have any trouble with technology throughout the series, please feel free to drop a message into the chat bar. Those of us here will be in the background to try to help you out as much as we can. Second item is that, again, the chat window is open. So please feel free to drop in. Let us know where you're tuning in from. We love to hear it. And then finally, we will be using the Q&A function during our conversation. So feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A toolbar, and that will help get that to the panelists as they're answering questions throughout the event today. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get rolling. It's my pleasure to introduce to you our moderator and one of our expert panelists, Jim Lowe. Jim is the Assistant Provost as well as the Executive Director for the Career Center Development here at the University of Connecticut, desperately an expert in this area. So Jim, thank you so much for joining us and leading this conversation. With that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Kate. I really appreciate Kate. Great way to start, right, folks? Really appreciate that, and it's great being here with all of you today. This is such a timely topic as we're all either working hybrid or back in the office a little bit, or working 100% remote at home. But if you do a quick Google search on hybrid workplaces, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, you didn't really get a whole lot. But now there are surveys out all over the place in terms of what employers are thinking, what employees are thinking. A recent poll by the Pulse of American Worker indicated that 8% of the employees are interested in returning to the workplace full-time in office, whereas 48% want to stay home all the time, and then 44% want to work hybrid. So that's clearly the majority of the workforce is saying in some way, shape, or form, I want some balance between home and work in terms of the modality of my employment. The Stanford Institute for Economic Policy indicated, and all these numbers are all over the place, so there's no universal kind of standard yet, but 55% of employees prefer hybrid, 25% full remote, 20% in the office. So those numbers are closely aligned to the Pulse of America survey. But the really interesting thing to me was a recent Accenture report that came out that said 63% of high growth, high profitability companies are open to hybrid experiences, where 69% of negative or no growth companies are not open to it. So the exact converse on those. So the high growth progressive companies really looking forward to and leaning into this hybrid context, but the negative no growth, non-inventive, non-creative companies are saying, no, we want everybody back in person. And that really varies by industry. But I think those are some interesting numbers to kind of frame our conversation about the intensity and volume of this subject. The Accenture report also said that about 83% of employees want some sort of balance between when they go into the office and when they work at home. Most of my work is influenced through students. And the interesting thing that I saw in a recent survey we conducted was that students in internships really wanted to be in the office, whereas students who graduated within the past 5 years, alumni, their numbers more or less modeled the typical worker. So what we're seeing through that is students who have never worked in an office are saying, I did a remote internship this summer and I really wanted to be in there with people, because they had never been in there with people. They don't have established networks. So those are some of the challenges around bringing new employees into an organization. Folks early in their career that don't have those established networks yet and don't really understand the communication lines. So we'll be discussing a lot of that today. So I could blather on forever here, but what I'd like to do is introduce Gabby, and Gabby's going to tell us a little bit about herself, and then we'll go over to Andre. Gabby?
Thank you, Jim, and thank you everyone on the UConn faculty and staff here who have brought me along. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Gabby Lilienthal. I was actually a CLAS grad from 2015. I have some HR consulting background, which I think helps to prepare me for these kind of conversations. And currently I am actually in New York City and I work for Columbia University. So it's nice to be back in a university environment. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And if there's any issues with audio or video, please in the chat, let me know. I just want to make sure that we're answering your questions and able to have a good discussion today. So thank you, Jim. And I think we're going to hand it over to Andre.
Andre?
Yes, hello everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Andre Santiago, pronouns he, him, his. I am a proud graduate of the 2007 UConn class. I was a music education major. Lived in Buckley most of that time, so it was nice to walk across the street to the Fine Arts Building where I spent most of my time. I am not currently teaching music. I did for a little while, but I currently work for a nonprofit organization here in Hartford, our capital city, called Leadership Greater Hartford, in which I teach leadership development for high schoolers all the way up to retirees. A big part of my job is doing some consulting and training work in which I spend a lot of time helping organizations navigate the ever-changing work landscape that COVID-19, the pandemic, and many other life issues that have emerged in the past 18 months have brought us. So I'm excited to be here today. Gabby, Jim, and I met with UConn team a few times and had a robust conversation. So please, we're not shy, to say the least. So add some questions to the chat, and Gabby and Jim and I will love to entertain those questions and comments. So Jim, thanks for having us, and the entire UConn team, thanks for continuing to bring us along. It's always exciting to be in a room full of Huskies. So thanks for having us.
Terrific, and absolutely looking forward to the time where we can start doing these things in person again. So thank you both, Gabby and Andre. Just for the sake of those who are attending the session, we're looking at this from both perspectives of the employer as well as the employee. So Gabby is going to take the role of the employer and the employer perspective on the issues, and Andre is going to be addressing the employee side of it. So I'd like to kick it off with sort of like the assets and benefits, Gabby, and we'll go to you first, of this hybrid culture from an employer perspective about creating interactions and how does that work, and what are some of the best practices around that?
Sure. So assets and benefits of work from home practices. Well, first of all, ever since this sort of pandemic began taking place, I think it was been the ultimate sort of leveler of the playing field for all of us to have to learn to adapt to working from home. From a corporate standpoint, when I used to work for Aetna, now a CVS health company, it was really the way that we were able to give employees some more flexibility and freedom and trust and autonomy to be able to get their job done. So a way that a corporation functions, it's a lot of the time the blend between, people who are in the office physically collaborating, as well as providing tools and resources to facilitate actually positive, productive work from home and even hybrid teams. So the asset is to be able to provide all of the employees, the flexibility and the ability to get their work done wherever they may be, and not just have to be in one remote location, and just to be able to, as a corporate culture, honor their autonomy, provide them the trust and the ability to work wherever they are needed. But I think there are obviously challenges that come along with that, especially with hybrid teams, and especially for some of us who may have never worked from home before. There are stigmas associated with it that we have to break down, to continue to break down, that I think hopefully we've all gotten some perspective on over these last 18, 20 months in the pandemic.
Terrific, Gabby. Andre, if you could just follow up on that from the employee perspective.
Yeah, I think, the new landscape of the workplace, there are many assets that have emerged. The use of technology. Many of us have been doing some virtual stuff even before the pandemic. So the assets are, we can work from home on a Monday, Friday if we need. If our child is sick, we can take some time and have a flexible work day. We don't have to be stuck in the office from 9 to 5 like we traditionally had to. Other assets that emerged are we as humans are seeing each other as humans more than we used to, right? We're not just employees, we are human beings. And Andre that shows up to the workplace is bringing with him all that is going on in his life. We don't have to compartmentalize like we used to. And there's benefits and challenges to that, right? So the asset is I can show up and be my authentic self, but also it then becomes a challenge because how much blurred lines do we allow to enter the workplace? So, Jim, I'm going to let you navigate this conversation because we can take this in a million different directions. But a huge challenge that we are seeing every day as we're reading the news is talent retention. And, I'm going to work for a place that treats me as that whole human being. It's not always about money, especially our younger generations are really showing us that there's more to life than working for the dollar, right? And some organizations that are doing it really well are being flexible and adaptive, right? When we talk about leadership, we're now talking about adaptive leadership. It's not just top-down leadership that can run a company anymore. It's if I want my talent to stay here, I need to figure out what they need and how best to serve them. And it's not just about the money anymore. There's some really cool organizations that are doing some really innovative things. And a 40-hour work week doesn't have to be a Monday through Friday work week. It can be a 4-day work week so that people can travel more or spend more time with family, right? There are a lot of opportunities that we're now integrating into the workplace. So lots of assets, but also many challenges that have emerged as well.
Thanks, Andre, for that. I think that's very insightful. Let's talk a minute about the issue of productivity. Another recent stat that I came across was that the average at-home worker is putting in 50 hours a week. And 80% of workers who are now working home or hybrid have indicated that they're working more hours now than they worked when they were in a traditional office setting. So Gabby, we'll go back to you on this one. How do you manage things like employee burnout? How do you manage things like taking a look at work-life balance? Because there's such a blur when I'm working from home and living at home and possibly working at 9 o'clock at night, where I never would have done that if I were in a brick and mortar setting.
Definitely great question. And I think it really has come from, like I said, us all finally being able to see what working from home really looks and feels like for ourselves. I mean, sure, we have greater flexibility, but it also means that we have removed the commute, the water cooler, the breaks that you've taken getting up and even moving, especially over the duration of this pandemic. I think we've all sort of been faced with what work really looks like now. So from, a corporate standpoint, there have to be those, regulations or policies put in. As a leader, how do you ensure you're empowering your team to work at their best, which means allowing them to set those barriers in their schedule, allowing them to have, their optimal working hours and to bake in those breaks or water cooler conversations or make sure that they're logging in at the appropriate time for them, because we aren't commuting anymore. We're going from room to room. We don't have the time to walk to get a coffee with someone when we're working from home. But those things are all incredibly valuable, which we don't want to lose also. So it's really, as a leader, empowering your team. How are you talking about these things? And how are you making sure they know, I trust that you're going to get the work done? So make sure that you're taking breaks and drinking water and eating meals and talking to your colleagues like you would be in an office, because those are as much a part of the employee experience as it is getting your work done.
Right. And I think the one thing that we need to keep in frame is that this technology that we're conversing on today existed 5 years ago, but we as a business community did not utilize it. Everybody came into the office and met in person. The pandemic created the necessity for using this, and the technology has definitely improved over the past year and a half. But Andre, if we could go over to you from the employee standpoint, this technology was always there, not always there, but there over the past at least 5 years. Now there's an expectation that I'm on call all the time. And, culturally, some companies are, when you're on call, you're on camera. So how do I manage my own personal home space, marry that, like you were saying a little bit ago, with this whole expectation of working from home and being your genuine self and bringing that all to the table?
Yeah, I think it's about having really important conversations as a team as to what the expectations and parameters are. I think so. Gabby talks about leadership, but we are all leaders at all different levels, right? It's not just the top leader. We all impact the organizational or team culture. And so it's really important for me as the employee to share what I can give, what hours of the day I work best. I don't work great from home, right? I was very transparent with my team from the very beginning. I have a hard time focusing. I am very much an OCD neat freak. And so if there's 12 minutes in between a meeting, I'm going to empty the dishwasher or go do something else. And while that's good to get up and to move, I needed those 12 minutes to prepare for something else or to actually do work instead of being in meetings. And so, it really is, it's integral for team members to have conversations as to what works best for the team, but paring it down, what works best for the individual. And so with my team, we don't ever expect to come back full time. There are things that can be done from home, and if it can be done from home and that's how you want to work, that's your desire to work, go for it. Who am I to say that you should then come to the office to do that grant when you could do it from home? So it really is about communication. And I know that's such a big word and we say communicate better, but it's about communicating more and communicating more deeply. And so it really is, there's no magic answer, unfortunately. It's every day recalibrating what worked yesterday, what didn't work yesterday. All right, let's figure it out. And as Gabby pointed out from kind of the employer side, I want to also highlight from the employee side that relationships are really important. People don't quit jobs because of the task. They typically quit jobs because of the relationships and the culture. And so all of us, whether you're the employee, the employer, we have to really focus on those relationships, because if I'm just doing tasks, it's very easy for me to find a new job and to move on, which is what we're all experiencing. Many of us are understaffed. Many of us are fearful of retaining our talent, because if we're just expecting people to show up and do a job, well, they can show up and do any job. Why are they doing this job, right? I've done this job for 15 years because of the community and the people that I work with. And so leadership really has to focus on, and I say leadership, I don't just mean top leadership like Gabby's talking about. I mean all leadership, all team, maybe I'll use that word. We all need to focus on the relationship and the process. We can't just focus on the task. So what are we doing in our weekly, daily routines to focus on that? And with our team, we have 2 days a week where we have lunch virtually together. And we're not allowed to talk about work. It's just an opportunity for us to check in, to reconnect, to sustain or rebuild or repair relationships, right? Those who break bread together typically have deeper relationships, right? And we're not breaking bread in the conference room like we used to. So let's have 2 days where you can pop on. It's not mandatory, but it's a nice time for us to check in and reconnect. What else are our organizations doing to focus on those relationships in the process?
Right. And I think you bring up a really good point there, Andre, about leadership. It's not only the top leadership, it's all levels of leadership. But I do feel very strongly that top leadership sets the culture for the organization, and that trickles down. And one of the voids that we're seeing right now is this lack of leadership or management development and training on how do you manage a hybrid team. I mean, hybrid teams have been around forever. particularly in the sales arena. So think about a national sales organization. The sales leader might be on the East Coast and have an entire army of folks fanned out across the country. They've been communicating with those folks and they're trained and schooled in that. 90% of the people in this situation never had to deal with this situation. And we just had a really good point from Dawn McKenzie, who says in the chat, I find that working from home is intense and we tend to be tethered to our computers with little opportunity to move around. Personally, I'm concerned for my health due to sitting in front of a computer for 8 to 10 hours a day. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks on the call are probably resonating with that. And one of the things that I did with my team was said, meetings don't have to be a half hour or an hour. No meeting should be an hour. I'm sorry, it's just way too long, other than meetings like this, because we have such big things to say. But in terms of operational meetings, we schedule them now for 45 minutes, because what I found for myself and for everybody on the team, they just go from meeting to meeting to meeting. And when you would say, okay, we're ending a little bit early, I'm giving you 11 minutes back, people would be like so excited. I'm like, that shouldn't make people excited that they get a quick break to grab a cup of coffee and use the restroom and maybe empty the dishwasher. So Gabby, I'll flip back to you on kind of the employer side in terms of management training, leadership development, and what are we doing or seeing in terms of some of these obstacles and how we're developing, particularly our young and emerging leaders, and how to manage this process when they've probably never been charged with doing that before and are still trying to get their sea legs in terms of general management and leadership. And now we add this monkey wrench into it.
No, it's a great point. And when I did HR consulting, we did a lot of leadership training across the country for new emerging, managing leaders who may have done this before and may have not, but having a hybrid team, an all virtual team or an all in-person team are all really unique challenges. And it's important to be able to be flexible enough to manage all of them, but there's a learning curve. So what we used to talk about in those training was, as a leader, you are responsible for, number one, leading by example. Number two, creating an infrastructure of success. But that's bringing to the table your experience as an employee. What did I love? What did I not love so much? And then as a leader, how are you being transparent and breaking down the barriers with your team to say what is going well and what is not? An employee survey or giving and receiving feedback is an incredible part of that process, but it's more than that. It's like Andre said, having, twice a week lunches virtually where we don't talk about work. It's creating a culture of safety and trust, so that way you can actually talk about the things that are working and are not. But what's really missed, what we focus on in the training, is creating a consistent employee and employer experience for everyone, no matter where you are. Because what can end up happening is, if you have some people who are in office and some people who are at home, there's that disconnect, right? Like, I could be walking by someone's desk and have an offhand conversation, or even go to get coffee with them, and the person at home doesn't receive that same treatment. They don't have the same level of small talk. They don't know what I did over the weekend, and I don't know what they did. So as much as you can, create that consistent experience, meaning, maybe we all do have that, warm up conversation, or we leave 5 minutes at the beginning of every meeting just to ask how each other are, or we make sure that when we're, all gathering in the room, we're also dialed in online so they can hear that conversation and participate in it. Because as a leader, we are setting the expectations for communication, frequency, and professionalism. It goes down to, yes, we are all humans, but as much as you can, create those positive interactions with every person on your team, that will create this connection, instead of what can be the fragmentation of having some people online and some people offline.
So and that's great, Gabby. I'm going to flip over to Andre real quick on this next one from an employee standpoint. What I don't want an exact percentage, but what piece of that is the employee's own responsibility? And I'll tell you how I'm framing that. In the beginning, when we were all virtual, I created these pop-up meetings for employees and would throw 3 employees into a meeting and give them a prompt of what they should talk about. What did you do this weekend, or whatever it happened to be? And after a while, and I thought that was a great thing to keep them connected, like water cooler and those conversations, I got some pushback of, do we have to keep doing this? because it wasn't organic and it wasn't natural. So, but I set the table for it and I said, this is an expectation. You all do it on your own. So now I do hear from some employees, I feel disconnected. And my pushback to them is, what are you doing about that? And how can I help? So from the employee standpoint, Andre, are there some best practices or tips or advice around, I'm feeling this way, my leadership is not doing anything to help me, what should I be doing?
Yeah, and I think this goes to your previous point about leadership controlling the culture. So leadership, top leadership really creates the policies and the procedures that impact culture, but every person at every level, whether you are middle management, whether you're new, whether you are, the cleaning crew, every person in an organization can impact a culture. And the example that I give is it only takes one bad apple on the team to really change the whole feeling of what that team is experiencing, right? And so, it really is, well, Jim, if those activities weren't seen as authentic anymore, okay, it's basically saying, don't come to me with a problem, come to me with a solution, right? So, okay, these activities aren't working, what would work? Right. And so maybe it's doing it's been 18 months. Let's do a survey. Let's have a focus group. Let's have a resource group created to help us figure out how we can improve communication, how we can improve morale, how we can improve employee engagement. There's not a one answer here, Jim. Unfortunately, it's what every entity is different. Every team is different. And, oftentimes at my organization, even one new team member can truly transform the energy and the feeling of a group and of an organization. And so recalibration is key. And I don't know what recalibration means for your organization, but recalibration for us is refocusing on the people and the personalities and the team dynamics. And so whenever we have one new person, we use the Enneagram as our kind of personality profiler, our personality team assessment here. And so whenever we have one new person, we share our types and where we are at our best as individuals, where we are in our uglies and how to avoid those uglies. And then we learn from the new team member as well. So that way we can kind of refocus, reassess. But maybe it's time to ask them what they need or want, right? I can't give answers for people because I'm not those people. So
Right.
It's about having conversations. It's about having dialogue. It's about brainstorming. It's about throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. It's a constant, I say leadership is an investment of time. And so if you as a leader are not spending some time each day, each week, talking to the team, figuring out how the team is doing, then you're not actually a leader, you're just a manager or a supervisor. And there's a big difference, right? Managers
Absolutely.
and supervisors focus on task, leaders focus on the people, and both are needed. But people say they're a leader of an organization. I say, are you? Right? I'm getting a sense that you're a decision maker, and that's great. But how well do you know your team? How well do you know what your team needs? How is your team doing? If you don't know the answers to those questions, you're a manager and a supervisor. And
Right.
so it's about having those critical, crucial, deep conversations. And if you're not able to do that as a leader, then you need to really invest in some coaching, some finding ways to be more vulnerable to allow for those interactions to occur. Again, not a one size fits all answer, Jim. I'm sorry, but hopefully there was something in there that.
No, that's great. I don't think any of these questions are one size fits all. We do have something in the chat, and I think this is really what a lot of people are grappling with right now. Moving from in-person to remote, everybody was doing the same thing. So all the meetings were virtual. Everybody was kind of in the same boat. Now that we're in this hybrid dynamic, team meetings where some people are in person and some people are virtual, and we'll go to you on this first, Gabby. Like, how do you manage to get the virtual people engaged in the conversation? Now, I know at MIT, for example, they actually came out with a mandate that if even one person was not in person in a meeting, the entire meeting was virtual. Because what they were finding was that the virtual attendees weren't as participative. They weren't being acknowledged by the host of the meeting, whatever it happened to be. So they went to the extreme of people on campus in meetings in their offices and not engaged in person. So I think that's one extreme. The other extreme is really, this notion that there's somebody virtually on the call who really isn't engaged because they're not having side conversations or they're not hearing what's happening on the other side of the room. So Gabby, any thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely. So once again, I'm going to go back and call upon that training that we used to give for, new and experienced leaders who were dealing with this for the first time. And there were a couple things that we did that were best practices that came from, consulting firms and things like that. And one of them would be, if there is a partial virtual, partial in-person meeting, cameras should be on and there should be a camera in the room to be able to, and hopefully, most companies are trying to equip rooms or people with the materials to be able to do that, so they can at least have eyes on the table, eyes on the people in the room, who is in the room. Because what can happen is you're dialed in as a room and you don't really go through the calculus of, okay, who's actually sitting in there, who is speaking. So that's one thing that we would always start with. So if there is a hybrid meeting, cameras should be on. And then there should be that moment at the beginning that says, okay, here's who's in the room. And before we start speaking, we're going to say, hi, it's Gabby, and then share your comment. And as you start to go and continue on the process of being a hybrid team or having meetings, it'll become more apparent. But I think really forcing people to go through the process of saying your name and then your thought, it will get you in the right mindset of, the people on the phone might not recognize me. So there was that. And that also helps you to manage your tone when you are IMing or emailing. One of the best practices for even outside of meetings is making sure that you're managing your tone and you're having more positive interactions than, perceived negative, and remembering that they don't see your face. They don't see you every day. They don't have you smiling as you walk by or, running into you in the hallway. So make sure that you're having those positive smiling interactions, even if you're not in person. Another one for meetings specifically would be silence. As a leader, creating space for people's voices, even, especially when you're on a hybrid meeting, I think most of us can relate to the experience of, if you're virtual and everyone else is in person, you're listening to voices on top of voices, or or you could be trying to get a word in edgewise, but there's just not enough time between or delay between them being done and your time to jump in. It can create awkwardness and sort of de-incentivize people from speaking. So that's sort of twofold. It's, as a leader, creating silent space for people to comment if needed, or even raise their hand system, and then really going one at a time. And in person, that's going to be really, really challenging because you can gauge when someone's gearing up to speak. You can look at someone and see they have something to say, but you have to give everyone really equal opportunities. So it's sitting in silence, leaving space for those voices, and committing to going one at a time and really projecting, this is me and this is my thought. So that's what we use to sort of teach in those sessions. Hopefully it's helpful.
Thanks so much for that, Gabby. One of the techniques that we've been using here is having a meeting moderator. So it's not the meeting leader. The meeting leader is focused on the content and the messaging and the dialogue, but to have somebody sitting off to the side saying things like, we haven't heard from Andre for a while. Andre, did you want to share anything? And really managing the flow of the conversation as opposed to the conversation itself.
Jim, I think that's a brilliant idea, and that's a recommendation I often give to a lot of my clients. If you're in a meeting and there's an agenda and we're all here in the same space, that's one thing. But when there's so many different moving parts and so many different levels of differentiation, facilitation is needed, and facilitation is a skill. Not everyone can facilitate a meeting. And so it really is an investment of finding those leaders who are skilled to do that moderation, the facilitation, moderating that you talked about, Jim. That's super important, right? Especially, not everyone can be a teacher, right? There are things that I was taught when I was studying to be a teacher, and how to control and manage classroom and energy and inclusion, right? All of that is super important, and not everyone is born with that skill, right? We have to learn that somehow. And so I wrote down in my notes, facilitation needed. So you definitely talked about one of the things I was going to highlight. But even today, after 18 months, I still have on my slide deck, the very first slide, my meeting expectations, right? What is expected of you as a participant in this meeting, whether you're in person or hybrid. Here are the goals and expectations of today's discussion. Here's what we hope to get out of it. And here's what I expect from everyone in this room. This isn't new, right? If you go to a meeting, you're supposed to listen, you're supposed to participate at some level. And just because you're doing it virtual as opposed to in person, there's still an expectation there. And so I think it's really important for leadership to remind people of those expectations regularly. I really liked what Gabby talked about, when she said, not everyone can chime in or feels empowered to chime in. And that was reminding me, not everyone learns the same way. And so what can we do as leader to provide maybe a pre or post experience for people to contribute? So maybe sending out agendas early. I know that's more work for us, but preparing people of what to expect within that meeting might give people on the virtual end more of an opportunity to find a way to contribute prior to the meeting, but also that post experience. Maybe not everyone had an opportunity to share. Here's a chat board or a post survey or something where people can continue to share or experience what was discussed at the meeting. I think is super important as well. So all great points from both of you. I don't have anything new. I do. And Jim, I told you I'm Italian and Puerto Rican, so I can talk forever. So please cut me off. But when your MIT example really reminded me that leadership needs to really think about their policies and procedures, because I guarantee you, before a lot of this, our policies and procedures were equal, not equitable. And so, someone put in the chat, she only got 1 day remote and her coworkers got 2 days. Why is that? And that's a great conversation for employees to have. Again, it's not a one size fits all. And so what works for one employee may not work for another. And so what am I doing as leader to tailor and customize the environment, the culture, the task, the relationship, so that it's equitable, so that people have what they need to be successful. And it's not just a blanket, we all get 1 day to work from home because that feels good. Well, right. I can't justify what feels good for others because I'm Andre, I'm not other people. So it's really about taking a look at policies and making sure they're equitable during the new now, not right. The now that was before, the now that's now, that focuses on individualism, that focuses on inclusion, that focuses on identity, right? These are all things we didn't really talk about before, but now we have to.
Right. And I want to bounce back to this question of the person who said, my coworkers have 2 days virtual, I only have 1. How do I broach that with my supervisor? And I don't think this is the only issue. I think there's a myriad of issues around hybrid work. And I think, Gabby, you said it, and Andre, you said it as well, this concept of trust. But I think as I think of my team coming to me and saying, well, so-and-so has 2 and I only got 1, and why is that? I shut down at that point. My expectation, and I don't get that from my team now, luckily, but my expectation is that you come to me and you say, Jim, I think it would be much more productive if I work 2 days from home, 3 days in the office. Here's how I intend to manage it. Here's what productivity would look like. So like you said earlier, Andre, they're coming with the solution. And then it's my job as a leader, supervisor, manager to look at that and make sure that it is inclusive and equitable. And I'm not saying yes to this person because of this and no to that person for the same reason. So I think in all of this, if anything, it's heightened the need for open communication and that level of trust. Now, if you don't have trust in your leader to go to them with that proposal, that's an entirely different situation. And that goes, Andre, to your people leave supervisors, they don't leave organizations and jobs. So, as you're all navigating this new normal today, realize that in 6 months, there'll be another new normal. Like this is not just, kind of a flat curve. This is all over the place. So it's that continual communication of here are my needs, here's what's going on, and here's how we manage that.
Yeah,
So,
I tell people, Jim, top leadership needs to listen more and employees need to talk more, right? That's how more communication will happen. People need to listen more. People in positional power need to listen more, and people who that positional power is influencing needs to talk more and talk more about what they need and want to stay within the job. And that's where the opportunity lies.
terrific. I want to flip real quick, and I'm being cognizant of time. We're about 12:40 right now, and I do want to leave some open time for Q&A at the end as well. But the concept of hiring and the concept of bringing new people onto the team, how has that changed? It's interesting. I was talking to a coworker, and they said, not a coworker, a colleague at another institution, and they said, we never turn our cameras on. I'm working with somebody in another department who was hired about 8 months ago, and I don't even know what they look like. And I don't know anything about them. And I started thinking about that from my perspective and how much I used to know about my team, and how much of that was lost because I wasn't popping in their office every morning saying, how was your weekend? So we tried to intentionally, Gabby, you used the word earlier when we were talking about meetings of forcing people into this new normal. And I think sometimes they need that forcing, or let's call it a gentle nudge. Let's not call it a forcing, a gentle nudge to develop a new behavior. But let's talk about that new employee experience. So Gabby, some best practices for orienting somebody who's not physically there to a new team, and how do you make them a part of that, particularly when you've got team members who already established that social dynamic in person before the pandemic started?
Thank you, Jim. That's a great question. I think some of us probably have experience either having changed jobs in these last 20 or so months, or working with somebody who may have joined your team, having a new employee join your team throughout the pandemic. I mean, there has been a lot of this activity picking back up, ever since we've been going through as the months have continued. But I think what is really important is those critical first experiences, because there's technology involved. You could be shipping someone their laptop, you're providing someone access to their tools, platforms, resources. Those experiences for a new employee are really telling. It is your first time really being a part of a company and a team, and they're really sensitive. So you as a leader, if you are in that position, it's important for you to be really honest and set the expectation about what their first couple of days should look like and what the expectation is. I mean, in your first couple of days on the job, you probably aren't just like diving right into the work. You're meeting the team, you're getting access, you're setting up direct deposit, you're doing those things that are your first couple of days. And when you are working from home, it can mean some dead space. So as a leader, address it. Like, yes, you will have probably some extra time. Connect with your new colleagues, maybe send them an IM, send an email, set up some time, set up your calendar and your email, your signature. So I think what it takes, and what Andre said, is being a leader is taking the time and it's addressing those things. So making sure that their computer arrives on the right day, making sure that you're providing your new people that right timely access. So it's not like they're locked out of systems and resources that their job will require when they actually do come on board. So being really intentional, and then giving them the warm introduction to their teammates, and also telling the team who currently exists there to say, all right, we're going to have a new team member coming on. I really want us all to be a part of this. So we're all going to meet as a team, but please reach out to them, make them feel warm and welcome, and have that one-on-one time to create your individual connection, because you will always be the person that they ask the question to first. And if it's a question like, I don't know where to go to submit a timesheet, they might not want to ask you first. They might want to go to a peer or start to build that relationship with them first, and you should encourage that. So those are the things that I would say as far as controlling the experience as much as possible, knowing things happen and some things are just out of our control, but setting the expectation like, here's what I've done to support you on your first couple of days. Well, some of it's out of my control, but here's how I'm committed to you as my new team member, and we're happy you're here.
Right. We've actually had within my department the opportunity to hire 6 new people during the course of the pandemic. And the first person started and it was rocky. We'd never done it that way before. We didn't know what to do. So we tried a bunch of different things. Then somebody on my team said, let's create a scrapbook. Everybody gets a page. And we left it wide open, and everybody on the team created a one-pager. They could do photos, they could do favorite quotes, they could do their part of their job description, but it had to be a balance of 50% you and 50% your job. Then we put that all together and sent it to the new person the week before they started, so they could get to know the team a little bit. And then we scheduled 10-minute, just 10-minute meet and greets with everybody on the team. I have a pretty big team, so there's like 27 meet and greets. So we didn't want to overwhelm people, but we wanted to at least have an opportunity for them to have a verbal conversation with somebody that they were going to be working with, even if they weren't in the same job responsibility or weren't depending upon one another. But the other key thing that I think was really helpful was the concept of mentorship and identifying somebody at their same level on the team who was their go-to. So that they wouldn't feel, oh, I don't know what to do, but I don't want to ask my boss because then I'm going to look stupid. And a lot of that developed longer lasting relationships where you see that those individuals now have a bond because they work together so closely. Andre, any perspectives from you?
Yeah, just elaborating on both of your wonderful points, onboarding is way more than just teaching someone how to do the job. It's helping someone to feel a part of the team, helping someone to understand how they as a person are going to, what they're going to bring, what they're going to contribute to the overall mission, vision, right? Especially our younger generations are so focused on the sense of belonging and the mission and vision, right? And so onboarding is way more than just the technology and the job, as you both have mentioned. And yeah, I think it's Gabby, you said it perfectly. It's intentionality.
Yeah.
It's making a game plan, helping people feel connected, invested, involved. All of that is going to retain the talent. Because again, we as humans want to work for somewhere or someone where we feel seen, valued, and heard, right? We're
Absolutely.
making a difference, whether in that goes across all sectors, for profit, nonprofit. You want to feel like you're contributing to the overall mission of what you're doing, right? And so onboarding is way more important, especially now in the hybrid landscape than it ever was before, because you can't just pop in and say hello. So absolutely, I agree with everything you both mentioned.
Right. The one thing I wanted to add to that, and somebody put in the chat, they love the scrapbook idea. It's become a part of our culture within our department, because I'll be in meetings now and something will happen and somebody will say, oh, I want to put that on my scrapbook page. So people are thinking that way now, and we're going to keep it even when most people are back in the office. But I want to talk about this concept of grace, of really developing a culture of we're all new at this, and we're all trying really hard to make these things happen, right? And Gabby and Andre, you both talked about trust, but I think it's grace for ourselves as supervisors, grace for ourselves as employees, in knowing that we're not always going to get it right. And that's okay. As long as we realize that and then retrench and figure out how do we do it better. Early on, there was this technology, I think it was called Donut Shop or something like that we were like, everybody's going to have, and throughout the day, you'd get a little pop-up on your thing saying, you have a donut shop appointment with somebody, and there were 3 minutes. And it was trying to replicate the water cooler thing, like going to the restroom or going to the water cooler, or getting a cup of coffee. You would randomly bump into an employee. And I remember seeing that pop up on mine, and I'd see somebody and I'd go, I just met with them a half hour ago. What? I'm like, I don't need to talk to them again. Or this is a challenging relationship. 3 minutes isn't really going to do it, and I don't have time right now. So we scrapped that and went on to something else. But we listened to the feedback of folks saying, this isn't really working for us, and I don't know why we're doing it. So if Andre, you could talk a little bit about supervisors and grace for employees who are still trying to manage this whole hybrid thing, and then we'll flip back to Gabby, and then I think we need to stop this back and forth and see if we have any other questions from our audience.
Yeah, it's all about testing and adjusting. Again, what works for this current team may not work even if we add one other person to the team. So I think it's about listening, it's about asking questions, seeking feedback, which is very hard for a lot of us, right? Me. It's about being courageous enough to be vulnerable, right? Vulnerability, if you know Brene Brown, vulnerability is the greatest measure of courage. And so me as a leader, to be graceful enough to say, hey, this works now, it might not work tomorrow. Let's have that conversation, and we'll continue to test and adjust, I think is key. Because the world is changing every day. We as humans are changing every day. The complexities of the workplace continue to change every day. So it really is about just flexible, adaptive leadership. And again, it's using creativity, using innovation, using everyone on the team, making sure everyone at the table has a voice, making sure that the right people are at the table, so that all voices have an opportunity to be heard. And it's about intentionality and going above and beyond what we used to do. If we want to keep this talent, we have to figure out what the talent needs to be kept.
Absolutely. Gabby, did you have any final thoughts on that?
I do, just a few. And a lot of it, as we talked about, is just assuming positive intent. A lot of the time, we can interpret other people's actions, perceive things, and we're always working through our frame. So assuming positive intent is something that, like Andre said, is on his first slide of every deck. That's on my first slide of every deck. It's like, we're here, welcome. We're all gonna, come to the table, be incredibly respectful, and assume positive intent no matter what. And that's really the table stakes and the foundation. But it's just about trying and making it a group effort even. It doesn't always have to be your ideas. They might not be the best, but, say what you're going to do it, and then talk about it. I think really being consistent in that way as a leader, bringing the team along, taking their ideas, testing, don't guess, test things, find what works, don't get too attached. But like you said, flexible, adaptable leadership is now the only way we really can do it. But assuming that, we all have the right intentions and we're all working towards the same goalpost, that will really hopefully remind people that we're all on the same team.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So I just want to go back to one of the stats that I mentioned at the beginning of this call, and this was the Accenture survey, was that 63% of high growth, high profitable organizations are embracing hybrid work environments, whereas 69% of negative or no growth companies, so those are stayed, dyed in the wall, not open to change, are saying, no, we want everybody back and we want them back right away. The choice is yours as employees, or even as leaders within an organization, to decide, is this new culture of what I'm existing in right now in the world of work aligned with who I am, what my values are, what I gain strength and insight from, or has this culture changed either within the department or within the company at large to something that is no longer meaningful to me? And then making decisions based on that, because you'll read all this stuff about the Great Resignation, and how many jobs are open right now, and how many people. I think one of the stats that I didn't mention earlier was 8% of people, when the pandemic started, moved to another area of the country, so we'll never come back in person to that job. And now a lot of employers are stuck with saying, we want you to come back. What do you mean you moved to Montana? So then you have a decision to make. Do I stay with this company and move back to where I don't want to live because I find value in my new residence or my new place of living? Or are there other opportunities out there? It was interesting to me as I was talking with one of our top employers, and I said, this whole virtual recruiting thing is probably a real boon for you, because you used to be able to only recruit student talents in Connecticut. Now you can recruit them all over the place. And he said it's a plus and a minus. The plus is I can recruit nationwide, and he's a tech company here in Connecticut. He said the minus is that the folks in Palo Alto can now recruit in Connecticut, whereas they never were able to do that before effectively. So there are lots of employment opportunities out there. So I just challenge everybody on the call, whether you're a leader, employer, employee, whatever it happens to be within the organization, if your current situation is not in sync with who you are, what you want to be, with your career aspirations, nobody's going to fix that but you. You have to take control over that, and you have to set a plan. We talk with our students all the time about having goals in the employment process and in the search process. And if you don't have a goal and you don't have a plan, you're not going to wind up in the destination that you hope to be in one day. So, even though hybrid is challenging for people, remote is good for some, not for others. If you're in a situation where whatever the situation, it's not working for you, it's time to start planning now, because this is not going away. This is the new world of work. And there are so many different dynamics and so many different possibilities out there. You owe it to yourself to do what's right and what's best for you. So with that, I'm seeing we're at 12:56, so we've got about 4 minutes left. I do want to say that if anybody is interested in reaching out to either Gabby, Andre, or myself for follow-up questions after this call, our contact information will be provided to you, and we'd be happy to engage in those offline conversations. So Andre just put his email in there, but I think Kate had said earlier that she's going to send that based on request to anybody who is reaching out.
Yes, so absolutely. And thank you, Jim, so much. Thank you to our panelists. This was an absolutely fantastic conversation. I think you guys just completely nailed it. I know I have been jotting down gems the entire time as we're moving into hybrid on our own. And I want to thank everyone who joined us for all of your fantastic questions and engagement in the chat. Exactly what Jim just said. If you have other questions, if you'd like to be put in touch with the panelists, please don't hesitate to jump out. We're happy to provide you with that info. Also, just as a quick reminder, these programs will be recorded. So if you have questions or want to circle back, it lives on our YouTube channel. So feel free to find it there. If you need any help, reach out again. And then thank you for joining us this time. Don't forget, we have more of these programs coming in the next couple months. And also February is our Elevate Career Month. So there'll be a whole flurry of programs then. In the meantime, thank you guys so much. This was really fantastic. Thank you again to our panelists. And in the meantime, stay well. We hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Kate, Gabby, Andre. Thanks for great discussion and conversation. It was truly a delight to be here with you today. And to all the folks who are out there listening, thank you for joining us today. And again, as Kate said, there'll be more of these, so please keep an eye out and do join us in the future. Be well, take care of yourself, take care of one another. Bye now.
Thank you.